Our scripture reading is from Luke chapter 4, verses 16 to 30, the rejection of Jesus in Nazareth. Listen to these words of scripture, and in them, the Spirit's word to you. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and the recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum.'" And he said, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, except Naaman the Syrian." When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Diane. Let us now continue our worship through the word. In 1939, Billie Holiday recorded the song "Strange Fruit." As the story goes, Billie tested this song before an audience in Harlem at Cafe Society. She sang, "Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees." When the final note finished reverberating through the club, there was only a stunned and shocked silence. Then 2 hands clapped together, then 4, then 8, until the audience rose to their feet in tears and applause. Another powerful singer, Nina Simone, would later remark, "That is the ugliest song I have ever heard." Ugly in the sense that it is violent and tears at the guts of what white people have done to my people in this country. Billie Holiday's regular recording label, Columbia Records, refused to record Strange Fruit, meaning Billie had to find another label to produce it, which she did. As Billie began to sing this song at other venues, it was all too common for white folks to get up and leave in the middle of her performance, so they did not have to hear any song about strange fruit. Strange fruit and songs like it have long been a tool of protest. It is a way to tell a story that powerfully gets at the reality of a situation and communicates profound emotion. A way to tap into the humanity of another in hopes that the cry of the heart will be heard. In the first century, on a Sabbath day in the temple, someone hands Jesus a scroll, and it is a poem from Isaiah. Jesus reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release of the captives and recovery of sight for the blind, to let the oppressed go free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then Jesus sits down and says, "The scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And the people in the temple are sort of happy with this. "Oh, great. That doesn't really require anything of me. Awesome. Joseph's kid really grew up, didn't he? He's always been a good kid. There was that one time that he got lost in Jerusalem and his parents couldn't find him, but other than that, such a good kid. And how he reads that scroll, so eloquent. Such interesting things Jesus has to say." Maybe that's not quite the response that Jesus was looking for. Maybe the people didn't really get it. But for whatever reason, Jesus takes this opportunity to double down. He could have just let it be, but he didn't. Instead, Jesus reaches into a dark corner of the proverbial closet and pulls out a couple of skeletons. "Hey, remember that time in the middle of a drought and famine when only a Gentile widow gave aid to our beloved prophet Elijah? We like to venerate him, but remember how actually his own people didn't help him or listen to him? Or hey, remember when the prophet Elisha could have been called upon to heal and help the community, but people acted like he didn't exist? Remember how the king didn't even know Elisha? A prophet is never welcome in his hometown." After this, the people chase Jesus into the outskirts of town to a place where they can push him off a cliff. Why? Well, Jesus, he's not wrong. They aren't mad at the guy for lying. They are infuriated with him for telling the truth. What is probably the most infuriating thing in this scenario for these people is that Jesus first got them to affirm Isaiah's words. Yes, good news to the poor. Yes, liberation for the oppressed. Yes. And then Jesus points out very specific ways the people have historically acted against their proclaimed values. And very quickly, the people go from, "Oh, that's Joseph's son, how cute," to "this guy has got to go." Such is the case with all prophets who strike too close to the nerve, who tell too much of the truth, who trouble the status quo, who point out when proclaimed values don't match behavior and policy. Philip Berrigan has said that the poor tell us who we are, the prophets tell us who we could be, so we hide the poor and we kill our prophets. I would expand this by saying that the marginalized of society tell us who we are: the poor, the queer community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, people who have bodies that don't conform to what is quote-unquote normal. The systematically oppressed, the people who are excluded. These are the people who are the most in touch with the truth about the systems of our society. And very often it is out of these communities that come prophets who try to tell us there is another way. Turns out one of the most threatening but necessary things is to actually engage in reality and tell the truth. Jesus offers the community at Nazareth the reality of their past, and he is rejected. Therefore, reenacting a long-standing pattern of the a long-standing pattern of the demonizing of the truth teller. The call of the prophet is a call to be uncomfortable. People don't like that. People don't like having to face their own failures or their insecurities. People don't want to confront the ways that they have benefited from a corrupt system. People are committed to things staying the same, to maintaining status, power, and privilege. It is much easier to pretend than it is to accept reality and accept the feelings that come with that reality. And so people protect themselves. They bully, they abuse, they gaslight, they kill. They remain completely apathetic to the social ills of our time. It is this tendency that continues to work itself out on prophets throughout history. We all learn about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but we only learn about the parts that are comfortable. Most people don't know that he also said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than they are about justice and humanity. Most of us don't know that he also said, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice." We forget that he also said, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." Dr. King was forever silenced for his truth-telling and the movement that he helped to create, as were people like Marsha P. Johnson, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, JFK, Harvey Milk. The list goes on and on. Like Jesus, these prophets were all crucified in one form or another for telling the truth and for having the gall to suggest that we be better, that we do better. In 2019, some of Hawaii's top musicians collaborated to produce a version of Ku Ha'aheo e Ku'u Hawaii. And they did this to protest recent events at Mauna Kea. They sang, "The sea of Hawaii surges in turmoil. The earth of Haumea rumbles and shakes. The highest heavens shudder up above. Alas, woeful indeed are the heartless foreigners. Be honored always, O beloved descendants of the land. Let us wear the honored a'ali'i of our beloved land. Paddle on in our pursuit of civil justice until our dignity and independence is restored." Events at Mauna Kea are certainly not the only reality that this song protests. Mauna Kea is yet another offense atop a long list of offenses. It is linked to the history of this land, the history of the ancestral prophets of this land who resisted, who died, and who were overthrown. Their homeland literally taken. A prophet is never welcome in his hometown. We are still missing and dismissing the words and songs of the prophets in our world today. The prophets are singing. Do we get up and walk out because we don't want to hear it? My ardent hope for our world is that we break the cycle of silencing the prophets and instead join their song. May it be so.